Hi, this is John Delancey, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to episode 239 of the Cinema Geeks. I am one of your Cinema Geeks, Optimus Solo, and joining me as usual is the Comic Concierge. Hello, Dan.
Hello.
We are back at it again, going deeper into our Western retrospective. You did hear a review of a modern movie too along the way, so we did take a quick break to talk about Project Hail Mary, but we are going to be back talking about more Western films now. So you've heard us cover a trilogy of John Wayne and John Ford films, and then today we're going to go in a different direction here. So Dan, what are we starting and what are we talking about in today's episode before we get to the facts?
Yeah, so the way we're doing a retrospective for Westerns is that we have like different blocks. We started with our John Ford block with Stagecoach, The Searchers, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And now we're entering our spaghetti Western block. And what better way to start that than the Man with No Name Trilogy, the Dollars Trilogy. I think it's the only trilogy I know of that has multiple names, but whatever you want to call it. So we're going to be talking about each film today. And then we're going to be talking about after this. We're getting into Django. Now, Django Unchained, and obviously the Quentin Tarantino, but the original Django, which of course was also hugely influential. And then we'll come back and we'll circle back with Sergio Leone for one more time with Once Upon a Time in the West to finish off this spaghetti Western before we get into our next block, which will be the remakes, first the original, and we'll talk about some original and remake Westerns. So we're just getting into spaghetti Westerns and looking forward to seeing like how these differ compared to the John Ford films we just talked about.
So Dan, what's your experience with it's interesting because it's a trilogy with two names, but it's about a man with no name. So what's your experience with this trilogy?
So I've only seen the first film, so that was my only experience with it. I remember going back and like seeing, watching, knowing obviously about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I went to go watch it, and then like I don't know, I feel like this I need to watch the first one first, so I did that, and for whatever reason, I never went back to watch the original, the other two. I think they weren't streaming or I forget, but what have you. So uh, this was the first time I was able to kind of go back and watch the first one for the first time in over a decade or so, and then finally finish it off. And The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has been like one of the biggest films on my list of shame, as it were, because considering how, it's one of the most popular movie names of all time and stuff like that. So happy to finally give the opportunity to watch it. So that was very limited experience going into it, and limited experience with spaghetti westerns in general. I think that's really the only one I've seen outside of the Once Upon a Time in the West, which we'll get to obviously in a little bit as well. So how about yourself? I believe this is the first time watch all around for you, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I knew the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I knew it was a thing, and it was always kind of on my list of things to eventually watch. But for whatever reason, other stuff was just in the way, or other stuff took priority, or whatever the case may be. So this was a good excuse for us doing this Western. One of the reasons for doing the Western retrospective to get a chance to finally watch some of these Westerns that have always been on my list, but for some reason I've just never watched. Even though, like I talked about in one of the other episodes, I was always a huge fan of like Westerns when it came to like TV Westerns and things of that nature growing up, but I just never had branched out into the cinema version of Western, like classic Westerns. So I've seen a few modern ones, obviously, but I had never seen any of these at all. So it was the first time watch for me for all of them, and I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. But before we get into the conversation, just how we're going to do this, we're going to talk about each one individually, and then we'll come back at the end to kind of talk about the trilogy as a whole. So before we talk about the first one, which is titled Fistful of Dollars, Dan's going to lay some background information for us and kind of set the stage. So, Dan, take it away.
I hope you're hungry as we enter the spaghetti western section of our Western retrospective, first taking a look at A Fistful of Dollars from 1964, directed by Sergio Leone, starring Clint Eastwood. In the film, a nameless drifter, played by Eastwood, rides into a dusty border town torn apart by two rival families, the Rojo brothers and the Baxters, who are locked in a violent struggle for control. Seeing an opportunity, he cleverly plays both sides against each other, selling information and provoking conflict to profit from their mutual distrust. Despite his cynical approach, he reveals a streak of compassion by rescuing a captive woman and returning her to her family, an act that exposes his double dealing. Captured and brutally beaten by the Rojos, he narrowly survives and recovers in hiding while the Rojos wipe out the Baxters entirely. Returning for a final reckoning, the stranger confronts the remaining gang in a calculated showdown, killing their leader Raymond and dismantling the last grip of power that they have. With both factions destroyed, he quietly leaves, restoring a fragile peace. It is an unofficial remake of Yojimbo by Akira Kurosawa. In fact, Kurosawa successfully sued the filmmakers and received a share of the profits. Sergio Leone did later acknowledge it was an inspiration for the movie. It had a very tight budget of $200,000, but was a major hit, making over $15 million worldwide. Its success helped launch the spaghetti western boom, which were nicknames given to westerns made in Italy that were later dubbed over. They were grittier, more stylized, and morally ambiguous. This was a huge surprise hit. Many major actors were actually offered Eastwood's role and turned it down. At this time, Eastwood was best known for his role on the TV show Rawhide, and this made him into a star. He even contributed heavily to the character's iconic look. The poncho was his idea. He even wore the same outfit across the trilogy without washing it to keep up the worn look. Composer Ennio Morricone created a groundbreaking score using unusual sounds, whistling, gunshots, and electric guitar, which helped define what the spaghetti western style and sound looked like. Leone wanted a more visual storytelling style, so the film relies heavily on looks, pauses, and tensions rather than long speeches, something that became a signature of his direction. When the film first premiered in Italy, it was a huge commercial success and audiences loved it with its gritty tone and violence and cool anti-hero. It quickly gained popularity across Europe and helped kick off the spaghetti western boom. Critics, however, were mixed at first. Some found it overly violent and cheap. Others had issues with it, loosely borrowing from Yojimbo. Over time, its reputation has grown, and many consider it one of the best westerns of all time. So, where do Kevin and I stand? Are we in agreement with those early critics, or do we find this has aged well? Back to Kevin and myself to discuss.
All right, so now that we have all of that information and the table set, Dan, this is the one that you had seen before. How was it on a rewatch watching a Fistful of Dollars and kind of getting it back into the spaghetti western motif?
Yeah, so going back into this, I realized I remembered very little of this, and I think the reason I ended up watching this was actually because I saw Yojimbo, which this remakes, of course, is famously a remake of Yojimbo, unauthorized, which is a whole nother story we can maybe talk about, which is funny, but it's interesting, like watching this after going into the John Ford films, and it's going to be like a weird comparison, but like many things in life, you can kind of compare it to like professional wrestling, where John Ford is like the Federation years, the Hulk Hogan years, where you have the John Wayne playing the white hat. It's very good guy, bad guy for the most part. You can kind of tell who's who. It's simplified in that manner. Where now we're kind of entering into the Attitude Era a little bit, right? Where characters are more in the gray. Heroes aren't necessarily heroes. They're more altruistic when it comes to their methods. Clint Eastwood's character here, he's not necessarily out here to save the day or anything like that. He's here to uh, be motivated by money and sometimes cause chaos. Like he's a little bit of a Stone Cold Steve Austin, kind of cause chaos and leave and watch everyone else kind of just go insane. So it was interesting just seeing this genre evolve as all genres do in that way. But it just struck me as a very interesting comparison with professional. It's like we're like the Attitude Era here, and of course, like with the Attitude Era, we have a lot of great music, which we can certainly talk about as well. I do think it takes a little bit to settle in with this because this is Sergio Leone's kind of. I think he's kind of discovering film in some ways, where if you're not used to the like dubbing, for example, it can be very awkward. It's like it reminds you of like watching a bad Godzilla movie with how bad the language can match up. So it can seem a bit odd in that way, but and it's very, I think, rough around the edges in that it's dirty, it's grimy, especially compared to like the Ford films, which are so kind of clean and pristine. This is not that in any way. So it's very different, but I definitely still rather enjoyed it a good deal. There's, I think, a lot. What I think I love about Leone and the way he makes his films, he has such a visual style, and I think it's because like when he's making his films, there is no sound. Like everything, all sound is added later. So he's always thinking about the visuals. He loves his wide screens. He loves faces. He shoots faces like no other. And when you have someone like a Clint Eastwood who can grimace like, anyone can grimace, it makes a lot of sense. But I generally enjoyed it. It's like I said, it takes a little bit to kind of get in the mold of this world and to kind of figure out what's going on here. And there are some elements where some of his schemes don't seem all that ingenious, and I'm kind of wondering like how they didn't see through them. Like, for example, there's a scene where he puts these characters into a graveyard, and I'm trying to figure out like how exactly was everyone so tricked by this, but what have you. Ultimately, I generally enjoyed it. I think the characters, even though they're morally a little bit more complex, they're still kind of cartoonish and very like larger than life type of characters. So, but it's certainly not my favorite in the trilogy. We'll get to that as we go on. But certainly enjoyed it. I'm curious, this being obviously your first time watching this, very different than the Ford films, like I mentioned. But what was your overall enjoyment or experience like with this?
Well, before I get to that, I can't get past my all of a sudden need that I didn't know I had to like write a dissertation comparing this to professional wrestling now, because now I'm seeing it in like so many different levels, and it's just like all like making total sense. But I would say that instead of the WWE side of the Attitude Era, though, I would probably say this is closer to the WCW NWO side of that, because
Maybe, yeah,
the NWO was supposedly stole the New World Order from All Japan or New
yeah,
Japan.
true,
So Toho can play New Japan or All Japan in Kurosawa, and we could
yeah,
steal their thing, and then we made it our own. And I definitely think Hogan works for the John Wayne comparison. John Wayne
yeah,
says like 3 lines in all of his movies. Hogan
yeah.
has like 3 moves in all of his matches. I think this works, Dan. We can do this like in a lot of different ways. So I didn't know I needed this, but I need it in my life now. So this was interesting, right? Like this is the introduction to the spaghetti westerns, to Sergio Leone, and to this part of Clint Eastwood's career. Like I've seen later Clint Eastwood stuff. I haven't seen a lot of early Clint Eastwood stuff. So like this is a introduction on a lot of different levels. And I totally agree with a lot of what you're saying. Like it is the grittier version of what we got before, right? It's not going to be as clean. I do question sometimes. I know that this is known for kind of creating a different type of Western that is dirtier, that is more of the anti-hero, that is not the white hat, not the clean good guy, bad guy. I would say though, I do see a lot of gray in a lot of John Wayne's characters that we saw in those other 3 movies though.
Yeah, that's a good
Like
point.
I know he's like the good guy, but he's a little bit in the middle. Like he's not doing everything like
Yeah,
as a quote unquote hero would. I'm not gonna say like he's an anti-hero to the version of Clint Eastwood in these films, but I do see an essence of an anti-hero that like could have been explored if you wanted to in some of those John Wayne characters. But I do think this takes it to a different level, obviously. I do appreciate like the different style. Like obviously John Ford's doing a lot more landscapes, whereas Leone is doing a lot more, like you said, up close and that the face aspect of it with that, as well as like he definitely loves his drawn out like duels or gunfights or whatever it might be. And it's like, I don't know what it reminds me of, but it's just like one of those things where like I feel like this is where cliffhangers came from, even though I know cliffhangers existed before this, but like the TV version where it's like, you know,
Yeah.
like the award shows or the reality shows or different things where they're like gonna announce a result and then they're like, oh, right after the break. Like I feel like that's like what we get with these like showdowns. It's like we're gonna have a showdown, but we're gonna take a commercial break. But instead of going to commercial, we're just gonna like keep panning to these two individuals and let the music
Yeah.
do all the work for us. So that's definitely something that we saw more in these films than we did in the John Ford films. So like I get that. I do think it does take some getting used to with the dubbing and that
Mhm.
type of thing, like, absolutely, and I think some younger audiences or more modern day folks would have a problem with that, like, it may be a barrier to entry for them, um, unless they grew up, like, watching a lot of anime and things of that nature where they're just used to all the dubbing and stuff like that, but the dubbing in this one in particular is for some reason worse than the other 2.
Yeah.
Um, like it's weird because these films, I know we're not talking about all of them together. They're made in different years, but they're all released in the same year, which has that ever happened? Have we ever had like a trilogy that were made separately, but then the studios released them in the United States, like back to back to back? Is that what happened with these? I think that's what I read.
Yeah. Well, released in the U.S. around the same time. The only one I can think of was be also the Three Colors trilogy that happened in 1994,
Hmm.
where they were made in separate years, but they all that was the blue, white, red.
Hmm.
They all were released 3 separate years. But when they came over to the U.S., they all kind of came over the U.S. in 1994 is like in within that year. So
Gotcha.
I, the only reason I know that is because I was watching old episodes of At the Movies with Roger
Okay.
Ebert and why am I getting
Siskel and
Siskel,
Ebert.
and they're doing their favorite
Yeah,
movies of the
yeah.
year, and Ebert's was the Three Colors trilogy, and he's like, I'm cheating, but they all came out this year, so that's the reason I knew that because they all came out that year. So, but
Nice.
those all came out separate years because they won um, Three Colors Blue won the Palme d'Or, Three Colors White won the Palme d'Or, and people thought it was going to be like a 3 year sweep, but then Pulp Fiction won it in 1994, so it stopped it from happening. But then when they came over to the U.S., so it's probably the only one else I can think of that was similar, where they technically were made different years, but came over to the United States altogether, in like different months.
Right. It makes it hard to like place I the the difference in when they're made, I guess, because, like, they're all released at the same time, and I have to go back into finding, like, how much time I didn't look at do the research to figure out, like, the difference between when they were actually made and filmed or why it seems like there's such a difference in the dubbing from this one to the other 2. But or maybe I just got used to it. Maybe, like, I was just used to it by the second and the third one, but I just felt like they were doing a better job of it in those other ones. So, I don't know, like, the behind the scenes part of that, but that was definitely something that during this specific one, A Fistful of Dollars was very noticeable, and it didn't necessarily ruin the film for me or anything like that, but it was like, "Oh, I gotta get used to this," like, in a different way, like, even I know John Ford's films, like, that it takes some getting used to with some of that too, right? Like, the
Hmm.
first film we watched of that, they're, like, hooting and hollering at these horses like nobody's business, and they're shooting without aiming and, you know, all of that type of stuff where it's like, "Oh, I just gotta get used to that," and, like, this set of films takes a different type of getting used to, like, it's just,
Yeah.
for someone that's not exposed to it, I guess, but I felt like there was some issues with laying the foundation for this story and for the character motivations in this film a little bit, where I feel like we just kinda jump in and you're not totally understanding why everybody, especially Clint Eastwood's character, like, what is the purpose? Why is he doing what he's doing? And kind of that type of thing, where I think once you've seen all of the films, that becomes more evident, and it gets into a conversation we can have at the end, but I just felt like as a like, if you're just watching this as a standalone film, I feel like there are some issues with the film not doing a good enough job of setting the stage or laying the foundation for some of the character motivations. So I did find that to be a little bit something I struggled with towards the first half of this film. I do appreciate the uh, the performances and the characters and things of that nature. Like the biggest standout for me from this film was the music, and
Oh yeah.
that is not something that I usually say. Like typically, I mean, I grew up with music, right? Like I was in band and in choir and doing all the things. Like I was involved with music for like my entire childhood and teenage years. And I'm not anti-music, but for some reason when it comes to film, like it's the last thing I notice typically. Like I'm just way more paying attention, I guess, to the dialogue and the performances and things of that nature, where I usually only notice music if it's like exceptionally bad and taking me out of the film, or in like this case where it's just like so good. And like this to me was like all of the sounds that you hear in every Western that has come since, I feel like is taking some type of cue from this film or this trilogy. Like it's just like all of the classic Western sounds. I'm like, oh, that's where this came from. Oh, that's where that came from. Like it's all right here. So like the music alone makes this film influential on that stage. And then I think like we talked about, there is other influential aspects of it that come from the anti-hero and the things of that nature and some of the way that it's shot. I just think as a movie itself, if I'm just judging it by itself as a standalone, I probably have more issues with this one than what we'll talk about in the next two films that we talk about. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on any of that, Dan?
Yeah, I guess I didn't have that. I think the issue maybe with his motivations is that they're very like minor in the sense that they're very simple. Like literally seems to be mostly just money, like in that way. But I could see like in the sense of like why he's going through all of this, or like what his ultimate goal is. It isn't as spelled out. Like
Hmm.
ultimately, like what is he trying to achieve? Isn't necessarily super clear, and then perhaps it's the desire to, just like I said, to hopefully benefit himself. And then when he ends up being caught and dealing with that, and if it's changes into the idea of revenge. But I do fully agree. Like when it comes to recording score, it is so purposely, like it brings us to another level. It's akin to like what John Williams score does to Star Wars. It's like without
Right.
that, who knows if Star Wars is what it is. Without that score, is this movie, does it make it the movie it is? Maybe not. Like even Sergio Leone mentioned that like he would keep scenes going on longer simply because he loved the score so much. So a lot of
Hmm.
the pacing, a lot of the way things play out, like the slower, the way he would just like allow scenes to kind of go on, all because of that score. But I do agree in the sense of like I mentioned, it does feel like he's kind of finding his way in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Like I, it's interesting because Eastwood doesn't speak English. He doesn't speak Eastwood doesn't speak Italian. Cesare Leone doesn't speak any English, so like they're all communicating through like interpreters. And
Hmm.
I wondered if like how much that impacts like what you're doing. I think it
Right.
had to be very simplified in that manner. But I think what's on screen, I think the visual language is what makes it work, and where it excels the most, and even like how it works against a lot of the tropes of the time, or even just the techniques of the time, without even maybe doing it purposely, like breaking code without realizing it. Even more so with the next film, but like you would never be able to show the hero shooting his gun. Like you get a lot of shots. Like the first time we see Clint Eastwood use his gun, it's from that side shot, and he's like mowing them down really, really one by one. And
Mm.
that's not necessarily something you would ever see. Like usually when you saw John Wayne shoot, you'd see him shoot the gun, and then it would cut, and then you would see the impact. You wouldn't technically see it all
Right.
happen. So it was like those types of things that really helped push the genre forward and like change things. And I don't, it wasn't even clear if it was necessarily a conscious choice in the sense of he was doing things that weren't necessarily allowed because they didn't have the Hays Code, with this being made in outside the country. But I think that freedom certainly helped.
Right.
And also just like something we didn't talk about, but within this whole trilogy, as I'm watching this, I'm like, like, what do these sets look like? Because obviously they're making these out in like probably the desert, and like the these towns that they're building, and like that I found rather impressive. Like this town in this one though, it is it looks depraved and like the like who wants to live there type of thing.
Hmm.
But yeah. One question though, I mentioned going into this, there was going to be a reference that even though you hadn't seen it, you're probably going to recognize it, considering you've seen Back to the Future. I'm guessing when that moment happened, you remembered it.
Oh, I must not have, because I I might have been just like fully immersed to try to figure out like what was
The
going on and whatnot.
with the the in Back to the Future 3, do you know when he like puts the
Oh, that's my least favorite Back to the Future movie. Hold on.
okay, well
That's probably why.
well, yeah, well, in Back to the Future 3, he uses like the same thing in this, where he puts the metal
Oh, yes, yes,
under the
yes,
cloak,
yes,
so
yes.
he gets
I was
shot.
trying to think of like I was trying to make more wrestling references to like I think
Yeah.
Bret Hart at one point like put a metal piece under his shirt
See, for
and
Goldberg,
somebody.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Now I know what you're talking about though. Yeah, totally get
yeah,
it.
yeah.
I
So it was,
and I think the other thing that makes this more like professional wrestling in the Attitude era or the NWO is like like that's when they showed more blood in wrestling. I felt like, and they got like
yeah,
a little bit more violent, like maybe ECW style, and they definitely do that. Like the amount of shots that they're showing, like torture and things of that nature within this trilogy, is something that I
yeah,
felt like we didn't get any of that in the other ones, the earlier Western films for sure.
definitely. No, when
I
no,
Go ahead.
no one dying and then like opening their eyes and then it's like closing them or anything like that. But
Yeah, I think when it came to, just to clarify, like I understand Eastwood's motivations once he's involved in the story. Like once
yeah,
he's there and he's playing the two sides off of each other, like that all I'm fine with. I think my problem is really just more with like the very, very beginning of the film, because it's like I don't know why he's at this town. I don't know what motivation he has for being there and why he decides to get involved. I guess that was where I was confused. Whereas if I had seen the other films, like it kind of goes to a question that I would ask at the end. If you watch these in a different order, I think this one works better, because I think it's more established in the other films who Clint Eastwood is and what his motivations are, where I wouldn't have that hiccup at the beginning of this film being like, what is the purpose and why on God's green earth is he going to stick around? Like once he's involved in the story, I get all of his motivations from that
yeah,
standpoint. It was just more the introduction of his character, whereas like I don't know, like I get part of it's mysterious, part of it's he's like this unnamed, nomad or stranger. But at the same time, if I'm trying to like be able to relate from the human side, I'm like, what compelling interest does he have in stopping at this town and then deciding to stay before he kind of gets more involved? I guess it was kind of where I think if they just introduced him as a God, I just lost my whole train of thought. Like a mercenary or a bounty hunter, like if they just introduced him somehow, like they do
hmm,
in the other films, I feel like it becomes much more smooth of a transition, and I would have totally understood it. But like, it's like we're picking up without that setup, whereas they set that up in both the second and the third film. We get more of that, right? Like the third film, we have the back and forth where he's running the trick with having the guy strung up and getting the money and shooting him down. Like we see that he's kind of doing this all for money. In the second film, they're totally introducing multiple characters as bounty hunters. In this film, they don't do any of that at the beginning, so I was lost for like the first 20 minutes trying to figure out like how did we get here? I guess was my issue.
okay, yeah. And I guess the way I took it was more so like it certainly was a mystery, but I was more. It felt like that was who the character was, and it seemed like it just was like, okay, clearly this is the guy who this is his life. He goes into a situation and he seems how can I make this? How can I take advantage of the situation I'm going into and go in from there? And I think it probably helps having the context of Yojimbo as well, and and maybe that might have given
Yeah.
me a better understanding because I know where that story is coming from, and which is a
Like
which I
Dan, if
think,
you find yourself in a strange Mexican city or or Spanish city, and there's two gangster families that are feuding, are you sticking around?
pro- probably no to all of that, personally, but yeah.
That's where I was like, I don't like. Maybe it's just me looking it through modern eyes. I guess I was like, okay, I get you're like the cool like dude, but like it wasn't introduced in the beginning that he's doing it for money or that
Yeah.
he's doing it for. I get like you have a slight motivation because you see the little kid or something of that, and you're like, oh, that's wrong. But is that enough to be like, okay, now I'm gonna put my life on the line for this and like to try to restructure this whole town, which is probably gonna end in like the entire town being slaughtered in a ghost town. Like I don't like
Yeah.
I you know what I mean? Like it's like, oh, I don't know if I went from step A to step B as fast as the movie was going. Um was my issue for this one. But what are any other thoughts you have for this first chapter?
No, I don't think. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. I think we can kind of save it for the next film. So you want to get into for a few dollars more?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's let you set the stage for us for a few dollars more, and then we'll get into our thoughts after the first time watch for both of us.
And another one. And for a few dollars more, the iconic stranger, the man with no name, played by Clint Eastwood, crosses paths with the ruthless and methodical bounty hunter, Colonel Mortimer, played by Lee Van Cleef, as both pursue the same target, the sadistic outlaw El Indio. Initially, they're rivals. The two men form an uneasy partnership to track down his gang, infiltrating their ranks and waiting for the right moment to strike. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear Mortimer has a personal vendetta. Indio was responsible for the death of his sister, and a haunting pocket watch Melody ties directly to that trauma. The plan culminates in a tense, drawn out showdown where Mortimer finally confronts Indio in a duel shaped by revenge. While the man with no name ensures the gang is eliminated after collecting the bounties, the two men part ways. Their temporary alliance dissolved once justice, personal and financial, has been served. Before this, Van Cleef mostly played minor villain roles in Hollywood. His performance as Colonel Mortimer turned him into a major international star and a defining face of the spaghetti westerns. He was not the first choice for the role, however. Henry Fonda, Charles Bronson, Lee Marvin were offered the role but turned it down. Moncho, the name of Clint Eastwood's character, is officially not the same character as Joe in Fistful of Dollars. This was a finding of an Italian court that adjudicated the lawsuit brought by Jolly Films, a producer of A Fistful of Dollars. After the release of that film, writer-director Sergio Leone had a falling out with the producers and made this movie with a different one. Jolly Films sued, claiming ownership of the Joe character, but lost when the court decided that the Western's gunfighter persona, characterized by the costume and mannerisms, belonged to the public domain's folklore. Writer and director Sergio Leone broke from many 1960 Hollywood rules with this movie, although he did not know them at the time, amongst them showing the shooter and the victim in the same shot, a horse being gunned down, marijuana use, and a scene of sexual assault. When it was released in Europe for a few dollars more was a major commercial hit and generally better received than A Fistful of Dollars by fans and critics. But where do Kevin and I stand? Back to us to discuss.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. Setting the stage here for a few dollars more, technically 1965, but like we talked about, they're all released in 67 in the US, Dan. So this was a first time watch for you. Having seen A Fistful of Dollars first for the second time, what was your experience with the first time watch of For a Few Dollars More?
It was interesting because at first I was trying to like determine because we see many of the same actors, but clearly playing different characters, maybe not. So that was where I was trying to get my bearings a little bit. Where it's like at first I thought we could just do, oh, we can just watch, just do Good to the Bad and the Ugly. But I'm like, wait, maybe we can't because maybe these are more connected. But ultimately, it doesn't really necessarily matter if they're the same characters or not. But again, going through this, as I mentioned with the first film, it's kind of Sergio Leone kind of learning the language of westerns. Kind of you see him, obviously the influences of someone like Akira Kurosawa and him adding his own flavor to it. And this feels even a bit more polished. And then bringing in someone like Lee Van Cleef, who again another veteran actor, and having him play against Clint Eastwood. And this, you mentioned motivations for, this makes a far more sense of it's maybe a bit more conventional when it's plot with its plot line. You have obviously rather evil individual. Again, we talked about black and white. In this case, I think the the bad guy is clearly the bad guy. But I love how even with all these like people are so distinct, have like all these little trinkets you can just uh, identify them by. With El Nito, it's obviously his n- not his watch. I don't know what you would call it exactly, but
Right.
and then of course, and then Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood. I talked about like how Clint Eastwood has this face that loves to snarl. Lee Van Cleef has one as well, and I honestly don't know. Like he's in a lot of films, but haven't seen him in a lot. Like I have not seen a lot of his movies. At least what he's best known for. Of course, he was in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, but like not in a huge part. Like this
Right.
clearly, you get to see far more of him. He plays such a good role, and I think in some ways, like his character is the main character here. Really, like I feel like he has much more of a journey. His character has much more of a story to say. Where Clint Eastwood's, his character Monaco or whatever you want to call it in this movie, the man with no name, and once again, he's pretty consistent. He doesn't really change. That's his gimmick. Where you know Colonel Douglas here, like there's more to him. He has a bit of a past, obviously. So I think I enjoyed this even more. I definitely feel like it is taking what worked with the first one, improving upon it, having an even stronger cast, having a narrative that is a bit more complete. It's rough to watch at times, but mostly because with how dark it can be. Again, talking about violence, very violent, but I think very with some great shootouts, some great climactic moments. Like it can be a bit slow paced, but I feel like even when it's taking its time, it that score makes it work, and it's magical in that way. What was your thoughts on this?
So watching the first one, Fistful of Dollars, as the introduction into a set of three films, which have a combined runtime of, I don't know, we'll call it like 19 hours. I don't know like how long the three films are once you put them all together. But having watched that first one and knowing that it was like the first of like at least, I don't know, at least 9 hours of watching, I was worried. Like I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is gonna be for me. Like, I was a little on the fence about the Fistful of Dollars. I liked some parts of it, other parts seemed a little rough, and I was like, "Oh, this might not be great." This movie, like, completely put me back in a good spot and put me at ease.
Nice.
I just feel like it's like you used the word polished. Like when I was thinking about this kind of coming into the record, I felt like I was gonna make a statement of something along the lines of like, to me, this is the most put together film. Like this is the
Hmm.
most complete film from beginning to end that is made properly and like just works. Like I'm not saying any of them are made improperly. I don't mean that, but it just feels like I felt like more of the I's are dotted, more of the T's are crossed. Not that it's just nice and neat, because there's a lot of grit to it still. There's a lot of grit in all of these films. Clearly, that's why they're known for what they are. And there's a lot of, dark side of like the dark side of westerns, I guess you could call it. So
Yeah.
like it still has all of that, but I just felt like it was more complete. Like there was not as many gaps for me in following. There was I didn't have any gaps as far as character motivation, background, none of that. And I just really loved the playing off of Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef. Like those two
Hmm.
going off of each other. And honestly, the other gentleman that plays El Indio is not bad either. Like
Yeah.
yes, he's slimy and yes, he's bad like he's supposed to be, but like he's doing a pretty good job playing off of these other two individuals as well. So I just liked like, yes, we have a large cast, I guess you could call it, but
Hmm.
they do it in a way where you really kind of get to know each individual for the most part. I mean, there's a few gang members that you don't really get to know, but there's quite a few that you get to at least get a glimpse of who they are. And I thought that it did a good job of giving some of them individual moments and having some more like one-on-one time for whether it be Clint Eastwood and gang member number two or whatever. I don't know all their names, but like I think
Hmm.
Groggy and Cachillo and Nino. I don't know. There was lots to Be, I think was one of them. I remember that. So like they do enough of giving them some moments where it's like it doesn't just feel like a bunch of foot soldiers that are unnamed. It feels like, they each have a little bit of a personality that you can kind of follow. So I enjoyed that. The music is on point. It's the same, a lot of the same stuff that uh, same foundation that we got from the first film, just expanded in different ways. So like that does wonders as well. And I think he actually gets credit for this film. I don't think he got credited in the first one, if I remember correctly. When you view the movie, at least through the streaming service I did, he's under like a pseudonym or something in the first film, whereas he's actually got his real name, I think, on the second one or something. There has to be some type of backstory to that, but I didn't dig into it. But so obviously that's good as well. It was interesting with the like if you view these three films and the actors that are present but playing different characters and all of this, that, and the other, like, is this a trilogy? Is this not a trilogy? I mean, I guess it goes into that question, but I don't think it's important one way or the other. Like, I think you can
Hmm.
watch them regardless, and if you wanna make some cool, like, little connections that some of them are the same characters, then cool, have fun with that and, like, do some fan fiction with how those are connected, I guess. But, like, I don't think it's important necessarily overall. But I just thought it was interesting because you do have you're in a Western, right? So one thing about westerns is learn early on if you're watching anything in this genre that nobody can be trusted, right? Like
Yeah.
like no matter who's presented as a good guy or bad guy or friends or whatever or colleagues or on the same side, that at any second somebody could be turning on somebody, somebody could be backstabbing somebody, shooting somebody in the back. Like you never know what the ultimate motivations are. And I think that works in the situation where you have like two different bounty hunters that are teaming up, but are they teaming up? And how is that dynamic going to work? Who's going to turn on who? How is that going to work? Like it just adds like a good amount of tension. Where I know you said like at times it may be like slow or taking its time with stuff. I never felt that necessarily because I was so invested in the tension that
Hmm.
was built between these individuals. There was a moment where it felt like at one point they were going to follow the exact same beat for beat moments that we got in the other film. Like, it's not the same film. I'm not saying that, and there's different characters with different motivations, but there was certain things where it's like, "Oh, I remember when they did this exact thing in the last film." Like
Yeah.
for example, Clint Eastwood's character, Manco, or the man with no name in this one, goes off ahead or goes into a different part of the area that he's not connected with the whole group, and then he has to like apparently take a horseback ride through shortcuts to like get to like somewhere that he shouldn't be ahead of him. Like he does that in both films. Like
Yeah.
there was a few times where it was like, oh, we're doing that again, but I didn't, even though that happened, I felt like they didn't like dwell on it too much, so I was very easy to like kind of get past that and just go back into the story. But overall, I really enjoyed this one a lot more than I thought I was going to. So I'm positive on this one for sure. Other thoughts on this one, Dan?
Yeah, well, also another consistency with all the movies in this, they love shooting hats.
Hmm.
There's so much hat shots, so many shooting of hats in this. Yeah, I think one thing this has is there's certainly probably the most emotional journey within this. Obviously, El Nado, like in El Nido, or I can't say his name correctly.
India.
In the Indio, like his, you see, he certainly is a this vicious individual, and it's also like it's intriguing, like looking into this history. It's like one of the first times where a movie would able, since like the 30s, showing like sexual assault in the way this did, and the way that that scene kind of goes back to that scene, and you're not really sure, what happened and how it plays out, and then, but also when you learn more about the history of Lee Van Cleef's character, like you said, it is the most complete in the sense of like this has the most layers to it, like, and this has the most depth to it when it comes to who these characters are and what's driving them, and how they're connected to the story. There's a lot here, to it, and in one of the things I think probably even rewards rewatching, because once you have that back knowledge and seeing how these pieces go together, it makes even more sense. But also the kind of the cat and mouse game they're playing. Again, making another weird comparison. How like El Nido. I'm never gonna get that right. Like how they're trying to play off that like oh I'm joining your gang as a mercenary, but he knows he's not really part of it. But they know he knows. It reminded me of that episode of Friends where it's like they know we know, or we know, and it's like one of those. It's just that like thing where he knows, but we know he knows, and how
Right.
but just how like they kept trying to one up each other, but it was never done to the point where it got a little bit overly ridiculous. But overall, it was.
I I
Go
think
ahead.
another thing that you kind of touch on here is like this almost has like a Hitchcockian feel when it comes to the supporting cast, right? Like I feel like there's some time and attention given to them. I know I was kind of already talking about it, but I had forgotten to like mention a couple characters. But just thinking of like in the first film, his quote unquote friend that he's living with. I'm not going to try to get all the names right, but there's like an individual that's kind of like putting him up, and like he's staying at his house, and that's a guy that gets tortured. And then there's also the know what you want to call it, the coffin maker.
Hmm.
I don't know what his technical job is. I'm not skilled in that part of the world, I guess. But whoever's like building the coffins for everybody, like the way that they like make those so interesting characters with so little to do that you're almost like, can I just like follow? Like, is there another movie of his backstory? And like they do that for in this one as well with the what do they call him? Like the old prophet, and like there's just these like little side characters that could be just throwaway characters for a lot of directors that Leone or the screenwriters or whatever are putting just enough essence into those characters that makes you want to see more of them or really enjoy their time on screen.
Hmm.
And I think that just helps build like this whole picture. It's like world building or ensemble building when it comes to this cast where like I feel like we've seen it so many times in other action films or other westerns or other whatever modern films where it's just like they're just cannon fodder or they're just like moving the plot from point A to point B. Whereas in these films, I feel like they're given a heart, like they're given a heart and soul to these some of these characters, which is weird because none of them are using, they're all being dubbed over and different stuff
Yeah.
like that. But like it's not like AI where you're looking at like somebody that like isn't there. Like some way they instill this like realness into these characters, and that's something that I really appreciated so far in both of these films.
Yeah, like he's able to, I think, convey a lot in a little bit of space, similar to Hitchcock, where like he can give you a lot of information, or like he'll make a character very distinct very quickly. So when they come back again, you'll be able to recognize them in some way. So definitely.
Yeah.
So.
Anything else on this second chapter, or should we move into the, I guess, the most notable name of the three that everybody knows, the good, the bad, and the ugly, whether they've seen it or not? Are you ready to
Yeah,
move on to that one?
yeah. Let's go ahead and finish off the trilogy.
All right. So why don't you set the stage for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then we'll give you our thoughts.
It is the end. It is the end, my friend, of the Dollars trilogy with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Set during the American Civil War, three morally ambiguous gunslingers, the good, Blondie, the bad, Angel Eyes, and the ugly, race across a war-torn landscape in search of a buried cache of Confederate gold. Blondie and Tuco form a shaky, exploitive partnership, repeatedly double crossing each other while using a hanging scam to make money until they're drawn into a larger hunt after Tuco learns the name of a cemetery holding the treasure and Blondie learns the grave itself. Meanwhile, the ruthless Angel Eyes pursues the same prize, eliminating anyone in his way. Their intersecting paths lead them through the desert, prison camps, and battlefields, culminating in a tense three-way standoff at Sam Hill until Blondie gets the upper hand, allowing him and Tuco to capture the prize. Although the last film in the trilogy, most consider it a prequel explaining how Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name gets his iconic poncho. The massive Sand Hill Cemetery wasn't a real location. It was constructed by the Spanish army in rural Spain with thousands of hand-placed stones arranged in a perfect spiral. It's since been restored by fans and actually can be visited to this day. Once again, Leone wanted Charles Bronson and Henry Fonda to play major roles, but that did not occur. More on that when we cover Once Upon a Time in the West. Safety standards were not top notch with this movie. The actor who played Toko nearly died multiple times. He was accidentally exposed to poison, almost decapitated by a passing train, and had a close call with a few explosives. Leone used the American Civil War setting to emphasize the absurdity and brutality of war, contrasting the characters' greed with the massive and senseless conflict around them. When The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly first came out, the reception was mixed, especially in the US. Many American critics thought it was too long, too violent, and morally cynical compared to traditional westerns. Reviewers weren't used to Leone's stylized direction, exaggerated characters, and operatic pacing, so it felt excessive to them at the time. That said, it did well with audiences and performed strongly at the box office, helping cement Clint Eastwood as a major star. In Europe, it was generally better received right away, where Leone's style was more appreciated. Of course, over time, the film's reputation has completely flipped. Critics and filmmakers began to recognize its influence, especially its editing, cinematography, and Ennio Morricone's iconic score. Today, it's widely considered one of the greatest movies, not just westerns, ever made, and often appears on best of all time lists, including IMDb and Letterboxd. But where do Kevin and I stand? Where do we think it fits among the trilogy? Back to us to discuss.
All right, thank you for that. Another first time watch for both of us, even though that seems hard to believe that neither one of us had seen this one going into this one. So but now we have. So we had a mix for me so far. We had like the first one, which was maybe a little bit lower for me, and then the second one, which I was very high on. I know you were, maybe the gap between the two wasn't as big for you, but I felt like you were a little more positive on the second one than the first one. When it comes to the wrap up of this thing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, where did you land, Dan?
Yeah, and like it's tough with a movie like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly because you always try to go in the movie. Like I try to go into any movie with like trying to set your expectations and not trying to like overhype yourself because you're almost guaranteed to be disappointed. But when you have a movie like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly that is obviously so well regarded, it's known as like one of the greatest westerns of all time. How do you how does it live up to that hype? And it's almost sometimes guaranteed to disappoint in some ways. But I think it's helpful, obviously, having the background of what came before, being able to, go into it. And honestly, going in, like watching it, it was not necessarily what I expected at all. Obviously, I didn't realize it would be set during the Civil War,
Mhm.
which it's not something we've with all the westerns we've done so far. Not something we've seen. Like we've seen like the most much more post Civil War than like taking place during the Civil War. Uh, uh, you see a lot of similarities in the sense, like you said, a lot of like repeated elements in the sense of these characters going into town. And this way, what their objectives are very clear in the sense of how they're trying to get money. Again, you have very uh, specific characters. Now we of course get Lee Van Cleef back again, but he's playing obviously Angel Eyes, a more very now he's in the villain role, and then getting Tuco as playing the ugly. I was actually taken back at first because we're watching this, and the good one of his biggest actions at first was they have this scheme they're going through where they fake trying to kill uh, uh, with the hanging. They let him, and then they figure out a way to get free, and they collect the money and go from there. And then like he's like, okay, well we're done now, so I'm gonna let you stay tied up in the middle of the desert, and I'll go on with my day. I'm like, well, that's kind of a crummy thing to do. Like you're the good guy, and you're like that seems kind of
The
I'm
bar's
kind of
low.
yeah. I mean, like I'm kind of on his side here, and but seeing how it like in a way how it has to like win you back, like how you have to get back on his side by like basically seeing him be tortured, um, and go through that. So obviously this is the longest of the three. It's over 3 hours or so, and I don't know, like oh no, it's almost 3 hours. Sorry, it's not over 3 hours. It's almost 3 hours. It has all those harmonics. It has all those elements of what we came before. Um, is it the best of all the three? I don't know. To me, it's not as clear cut as it's made out to be, personally, because there's certainly a lot of greatness here. A lot of what worked are here as well. Like it, Leone is a master. Like I said, when it comes to his visual style, the epicness of this is incredible. But I think, like you mentioned with, or we talked about with the second film, like the characters here, I think they're interesting. They're entertaining, but I don't think we have as much in the sense of that emotional connection. It's not here as much. Obviously, it's more so because they're just after riches. Like that's the goal here. and it's not necessarily a bad goal, but I think it limits the general impact in the sense of like how much the story can um like the I think it doesn't have that emotional connection that the second one did for me. So I don't know. Like it's certainly obviously deserving of its place for a lot of reasons. I'm glad I watched it, but I'm curious like what you thought of it compared to everything that came before.
I think for me, it's interesting. Like this is almost the least Western out of all of them.
In some ways, it is. I mean,
You know what I mean?
there's a lot of desert, but
Yeah, like the setting is Western, I guess, but like it's almost more of an epic. Like I don't, maybe not epic, but like it's like got the war stuff going on, which they're like it's like Forrest Gump esque. Like they're just like getting thrown into random like parts of American history and like somehow playing a part in like major things that are happening in this war, but like nobody knows it. Like so it's interesting, like, you have that war background, you have a lot more where it's just, like, them going after money, you lose a little bit of the Western aspect of what you get, like, in some of the ones we've seen that are just more, like, I guess, classic to me Western, where this is, like, Western on the fringes, but then there's a whole lot of other stuff going on that's not Western, um, and, I think it serves a purpose in making it stand out and be a little different than the other 2 that we've just watched in some ways, but in other ways, you do have to, like, I don't know, suspend some disbelief or, like, you have to be able to willing to just, like, roll with what's going on here. Like, we have 2 sides of a civil war that are having a battle with a very strategically important bridge or river or whatever we're trying to, like, set that up as, and these folks are able to just, like, walk to the bridge and blow it up. Or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, no
yeah.
I don't know if that happens in real life, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the 2 sides are gonna be, like, keeping a closer eye on anybody that's coming near that. So, like, there's some issues like that where it's like, okay, I'll just go with it." It didn't take me out of the film, but it's just like, "Okay, I'm just gonna, like, not think too hard about those aspects, and we're gonna go on." I think the interesting thing here is, though, is the big time inclusion of a 3rd. To me, I know the one is labeled the good, one is labeled the bad, and one is labeled the ugly, but it's almost as if you can't really I guess you can't make that argument for Angel Eyes being an anti-hero, but you get 3 characters that to me have more shades of gray than what we got in the other films. Like, before I don't know, it felt like a different dynamic. So, like, I feel like by putting Tuco in here, the quote unquote ugly one, I guess, um, it takes away from their ability to elevate some of the other supporting cast because we have to spend a lot more time with these 3 main guys, right? And I know there
Yeah.
was 3 guys that we were talking about with Indio and Eastwood character and Lee Van Cleef's character in the other film, but it's a different dynamic, I feel like, because it was 2 working against 1. Whereas in this one, you get 3 individuals that are, yes, at times they're working together, but you still get the feel that they're all 3 separate. And so I feel like you had to invest a lot more into that. So, like, yes, we do get like the drunk a union captain, and we do get like some of these other folks, but there's not a lot to them, right? Like they're a little more one note than what we get with the other supporting cast in the other films. At least that's how I kind of felt. I still think this one works. Like I think the second one and the third one work more as like both within each other as like this trilogy, but I think they both also work as individual films by themselves. And I think that's for me where the first one almost needs these 2 for me to be as a better film.
Yeah.
So I still enjoy this one. I felt a lot more of the runtime in this one, obviously, than the other ones. Granted, it is longer, so you're gonna feel it in some ways. But I think there was some like you mentioned it in the last one where like there were some slow aspects. I didn't pick up on that as much in the middle one, but on this one for sure, I'm like, okay, like I get it, but let's get there in a couple situations, like where it came. I do like some of the clever ways they do some callbacks to the beginning with like the shooting of the rope. Because at first I was like, oh, he's just gonna leave this guy here,
Yeah, yeah.
he's about to die. I don't know why I didn't pick up like, oh, he's just getting far enough away where he can like do what he did at the beginning. Like it's like, oh, that's a perfect way to like
Yeah.
come full circle on that. I don't know why that caught me off guard, but like, so I think there's a lot to like on this one. I'm a little torn on if I if all of it works quite as much as like let's say the second one did for me. I do think it's good. I think it's better than good. I think it's a I understand why it's known. I understand why it's got the reputation it does and where some of the influential aspects come from it. I think if you're like doing a deep dive into each one of these films though, I don't think it's as clear cut as like which one has the most name recognition compared to like for me which one was the best movie.
Yeah, I was like considering the overall like reception of all these. Like, would think it was going. My overall impression would be clear, and it's not necessarily like I think my overall I like them almost equally, very close to one another. Like the first one, I think is like on a filmmaking standpoint probably the least well made film, but in a lot of ways I kind of appreciate just the ambition of it because it's
Mhm.
it's just the achievement of getting that made, like the fact that it's you're going out and getting it done and clearly just trying to probably learn as you go, and like that, like the fact that it works as well as it does, it's a bit of a miracle. But like I still think I don't have any issues, and I think the good, the bad, the ugly too is one. I think if I saw it again I probably would enjoy it even more, and being able to probably pick up on things that um I missed. But and it certainly you see a lot of what Leone's doing here, and of in the sense of what he's trying to say, playing it against the Civil War, and what he's utilizing these characters, um, and obviously like with placing them against this North and the South, and as we see these elements and these Northerners and Southerners, and none of them are idyllic individuals by any means, a stretch of the imagination. But also like seeing the Northern prison camp and how that goes, and I think there's I think it's certainly saying, even though it's not made in America, it's certainly saying a lot about the development of America, and how you know the country moves on from this point. But I think when I look at overall the complexity of the characters, and how like the structure of it, and how it plays out, and how we learn more about who these individuals are as people, I feel like the second film it like does it in a more intriguing way, and I've like had a bit more surprises in that with that, where the third film it's more of the epicness, more the
Mhm.
scale, where like the movie kind of impresses you because like there are these gigantic battle sequences, and I think what's kind of fun about it is that like the Forrest Gump is a good comparison because you're not the purpose of the movie isn't the battle, it's just getting around the battle because it's that's more of a obstacle than it is the purpose. So that's kind of cool, like just being amongst just the chaos of that moment. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because I think a lot of times with history, we look back at like those events and like you think like that's how you define an era or that's how you define a certain span of years, and you forget like there's all kinds of other people living around that, right? Like there's
yeah,
all kinds of other stories happening like kitty corner or adjacent to these big huge events. And it's always weird when you see it, especially portrayed in like a film like this, like or like Forrest Gump, where it's like, oh, there's just other people that are maybe
yeah,
not
yeah,
like central to that big conflict or that big epic moment in our history, but like that's reality is that like there was a lot of other folks alive at that time in the areas and stuff like that. So it's like it, but then you're also like, do I buy into the closeness of
hmm
the events to the people and things of that nature, which I get. I think part of it for me too is like maybe I'm just a big Lee Van Cleef fan based on these 2 films, but, like, the fact that he's involved in the second and the third film and he's absent from the first one, like, it almost makes me, like, lean towards those other 2 a little bit more, like, "Oh, I'm missing some Lee Van Cleef in that first film." Um, and granted, there like you talked about, like, there's, like, 12 or 13 actors that portray different characters in at least 2 of the 3 films, but, like, he's clearly one of the big ones from the second and third film that is not in the first one, so it's like, oh,
yeah.
which I find interesting as well. But I had two questions for you. Like, number one, and this is kind of more thinking of like the trilogy and stuff like that. Do you feel like this is in fact a trilogy, or are these films that just have some similarities, but like they totally stand by themselves?
I think it's but I think they certainly stand by themselves in the sense of you can watch, like, if you were just to watch the good, bad, and the ugly by itself, you would be able to do so. But I think it's trilogy in the sense of like they all share similar makeup, they all share similar ideas. It's more of a thematic trilogy than it is a narrative one.
Hmm.
Something like the Vengeance trilogy comes to mind, like the Old Boy Lady Vengeance trilogy, or so like something. So I think it does qualify as a trilogy, but in a different sense than like the classic like Back to the Future trilogy
Right.
or Lord of the Rings trilogy.
And then my other question is, like, we watched these in order of when they were made, right? Like, technically, one was made in '64, the other was made in '65, the other was made in '66. They all get released in '67 in the US. So we watched them in that order. Do you think if you were like introducing somebody to this trilogy, would you suggest they watch them in the same order, or would you switch the order up?
I still would say the same order because because I
See,
think if
I'm on
I
the
think
other side.
yeah, I say this the released order because I feel like going from, so what order would you go from second,
Well,
third,
so
first,
there's a
or
lot of
reverse?
interesting stuff. There's a lot of interesting theories online because the way that we see them is not chronological,
Yeah.
right? Like, because the good, the bad, and the ugly is in the Civil War era, it completely dates that as technically happening first. Because there's other things that we see in the other two films that date them after that.
Okay.
So I feel like, to me, I go back and forth on the order of the first two. I feel like you watch A Fistful of Dollars last,
Mm,
because I think by that point, if you watch For a Few Dollars More or The Good and the Bad and the Ugly first, to me, you don't have any hiccups at the beginning of Fistful of Dollars. You understand who this character is. He's later on in life, and he's done the things that he's done, and like, I totally feel like it works better with that coming last. I don't know whether you say The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly then For a Few Dollars More, or vice versa. For a Few Dollars More introduces him as a bounty hunter, and then The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, we clearly see he's running a scheme. I feel like those two are interchangeable. There is like some fun videos that you can go and find online, like whether you go through YouTube or whatever, because there's different little things that people will like. None of this was planned by Sergio Leone. I don't think any of it
yeah.
necessarily holds weight, but there's like things that you can see that are kind of cool little like Easter eggs, like the the hat that gets shot up in the air like a million times in the one film.
Mm,
If you watch one of the other films, his hat from the first scene has those holes in it.
mm.
Um, I don't know if that, like, at least that's the theory online. I didn't like go back to like rewatch the films to say like, oh, that is the case or whatever. But I think there's some fun like little things that you could do with this. But like, yeah, for me, I'm torn on which one you watch first, but I would actually watch A Fistful of Dollars last.
My thought with watching them in order just is more so like because the first one, like on a filmmaking standpoint, is a little bit rougher. Like I
Yeah.
don't know if that would be like, oh wow, it's like watching a TV show and then like you watch the pilot
Hmm.
and it's like, oh, and it's like, oh, the show wasn't nearly as good good yet. It's like,
Right.
but at the same time, like I said, I don't think it's like the quality is that huge of a drop off. But I could certainly see. I think I could see the logic in saying it would allow for different narrative experience, like you mentioned, because now you do have that character later on in life, and you have a better understanding of who he is. So maybe those actions have more context. So it'd be
Right.
interesting for sure.
But none of them technically work like that because he gets like a bunch of money in multiple movies, and then you just have to like, I guess, accept the fact that he loses it all in between monies or in between movies. Like, apparently every
He made
time there's
he made some bad investments,
he's not a good investor. He
Yeah.
gets the money.
No.
He doesn't know what to do with it once he gets it for sure. But it's definitely interesting. And then there's like some interesting theories about Lee Van Cleef's character and how those uh could be connected and actually the same character, even though there's really no way they could be. But like, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun like reading up on people's like theories on how what they can do with these three films. I would definitely I think for me, like, I enjoyed For a Few Dollars more the most. Like, I think I would put that, like, on the top of this trilogy, and then
Mhm.
I think The Good and the Bad and the Ugly for me is just slightly below it, not very far, just, like, the slightest of edges, and then, like I said, A Fistful of Dollars, I probably need to rewatch after watching those other 2 to, like, get more appreciation for, but currently, it's kind of at the bottom of the 3, but I can still see, like, what we started off with, like, you get why these are known, you get what impact these had on Westerns overall,
Mhm.
which I think was harder to see with the John Ford films. Like, I do get the influence that the John Ford films had and John Wayne's character and some of that stuff, and I don't deny that that influence is there, but I feel like this set had even more, like, tangible, like, things that you can't watch these films and not see Tarantino.
Yeah.
Like, or other modern westerns. Like, you can tell, like, not just westerns, but modern movies that are totally grabbing some of this, whether it be the anti-hero, whether it be the violence factor, whether it be the close-ups and, like, the extended, like, showdowns and all of that type of stuff. Like, I feel like there's so much coming from these 3 films, that, like, their influence is undeniable regardless of where you land on each individual film.
Yeah, especially the score, like you mentioned. It is
Yeah,
like every score is every like I feel like Western score after this is kind of trying to just emulate what comes here. It's interesting because like you have John Ford, and John Ford influences Akira Kurosawa in a lot of ways, and then Akira Kurosawa influences Leone, and then like so it's like and then of course Tarantino and Spielberg and everyone after that. So it's just interesting like the connections there because it's like you have the Western, which influences the samurai film, and the samurai film influences the Western, and that cyclical nature of
yeah,
influence. So, but yeah, there is certainly more of a direct line because obviously, when you see like a lot of references to like shootouts and like the gunplay and stuff like that, it's much more like this in this trilogy than it is like the John Ford films, which are more like the high end stunts, like the more like big punches, and the
mhm,
more like almost like the type of action you would see like in a play
yeah.
compared to like what we get here.
No, I totally agree, and just so we're completely clear, it seems like there is absolutely no consensus on the which films are better than others in this trilogy. Like,
Oh, really?
like, if you go to Metacritic, Good and Bad and the Ugly is a 90. And then you go to for a few dollars more is a 74, and then for A Fistful of Dollars is 65. If you go to Rotten Tomatoes, A Fistful of Dollars is 98, Good and Bad the Ugly is 97, and For a Few Dollars More is down to 92. So it's like, which surprises me. I'm sure, like, that there's that much of
Yeah.
a gap, and For a Few Dollars More is that much lower on Rotten Tomatoes. So I feel like every source you go to is going to tell you a different version of what order these go in. I think it's fun to watch them all together, though. I think that's like a good experience. Like, if you haven't, like, I would much more suggest somebody watching all 3 of them versus just, like, one as a one-off.
Yeah, it's just because like looking at like the best of lists, like the on IMDb, like the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is like number 10. Like Letterbox is up there as well, where a few dollars more is up there too, but it's like in the 30s, 40s. So I think when it looks
I think
just the general,
it might be the more forgotten one because you get A Fistful of Dollars is the first one, right? So, like, you always
yeah,
get more credit for being, like, the first one, and then,
it's
like,
the
The
middle
Good, the Bad, and
child.
the
Yeah,
Ugly is the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the most known one, right? Like, it's got the most name
yeah,
recognition, but I feel like For a Few Dollars More is, like, the hidden gem in the middle.
yeah. I do think it probably and also it probably it's the title I forget the most. So maybe it's like
Yeah.
um, it is like the middle child syndrome. But I think personally, like you said, I think we're at agreement in the sense of I think looking at which one I walk away thinking which one do I like rate the highest. It would probably still be a few dollars more, but glad I do think watching them in tandem is the best way to do it. And then maybe if I were ever to rewatch them again, I would try a different. I'd go a different way. Maybe I would start with go backwards. Start with good, bad, the ugly, and
To see how it
work my
works that
yeah,
way, like, if you did it,
yeah,
like, back to back, like, what kind of impact it has. on like how you view the story, it would be kind of interesting. It's like what's those movies like? It's like the vantage point thing, right? Like you
Yeah.
gotta come from a different perspective and see things. So like you talked about in the beginning, Dan, we have one more Sergio Leone film that we're gonna cover, but we're gonna do something else in between. I just now realized that I have seen one Sergio Leone film, but it's 1984's Once Upon a Time in America.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
that I have seen, but I have not seen Once Upon a Time in the West. But what are we doing next before that?
Before that, we're going to go to, speaking of Tarantino, one of the films that he talks about as a huge influence, and one that he kind of a film that kind of starts his own type of genre within the genre, and that being the original Django from 1966 from Sergio Kobashi, starring Franco Nero. Again, I am bad saying words out loud. Yeah, we're gonna go. I've never seen Django, so it'll be the first time watch for me. But it's currently streaming on a number of different platforms, including Canopy. So if your library uses that, you can check it out there. But it'll be a first. This came out in 1966, so obviously around the same time, obviously as this did, where that spaghetti western is really starting to establish itself as its own version of the western. So curious to see how much of what happened with the Dollar Trilogy influences that film, and how much it differs and things like that. Because I really know very little about it beyond just the poster and some scenes I've seen here and there. So,
Yeah, it's gonna be a first time watch for me. Another interesting thing, the only thing I know about this film was just the fact that I saw that it was also supposed to be loosely connected to or influenced by Yojimbo. So I
yeah.
don't know. We'll have to see. Like, I feel like we watched this one, and then we're gonna have to go back and see Kurosawa's film and like do our whole talk about which one does the topic the best. But I'm definitely intrigued to see this one, and then to go back to Once Upon a Time in the West as well. I think it's going to be an interesting way to kind of close out this spaghetti western block, and kind of excited to see how they all fall, and what my reaction is to them, because I know nobody involved in this film, like the cast wise. I don't think I've seen any of them in anything.
Well,
So,
if you've seen Django, you've seen Franco, because he had a cameo in Django
oh, okay.
Unchained. So, but like he was in the one bar when like they were like fighting, but that's about it. So
Okay. I did forget to mention too that Tuco character, the Eli Wallach from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I did recognize him. His credit from The Godfather Part 3, I think it is, or one of
mm,
the Godfathers. He plays Don Altobello, who's one of the main antagonists, I think, in the third film in that series. So it's interesting that he kind of was involved with another different type of trilogy 25 years later. So.
nice.
Um, but yeah, so we'll be covering Django from 1966 next. If you want to keep in touch or keep in contact with anything Dan or myself is doing, you can search Dan out at the Comic Concierge or follow him on Letterboxd. We should eventually probably put the link in one of our show notes or something, make it easier on people. I did find out that my Letterboxd is actually, I think, my first name in the year 1981. I
Okay.
don't think it's my first and last name. I think it's just Kevin 1981. So now you know how old I am. But you can follow me on that, or you can search out Optimus Solo, or you can look at the Cinema Geeks. You can search us out on different social media or the geekcastradio.com. So that does it for this episode. Tune in next time for another chance to listen to more of the Cinema Geeks.